but are they willing to break some glass with decisive and aggressive action to advance a pro-housing agenda so that all of our families can afford a roof over their head? So let's spend the next 90 minutes getting to know who's the biggest pro-housing gubernatorial candidate we have.
Governor Gavin Newsom came into office in 2019 with a promise to build millions more homes. And in the years since, dozens of pro-housing laws have passed, some of them written by heroic legislators in this very room. And yet the number of new homes being built in California is basically the same as when Newsom took office. Housing is a slow and hard problem to solve. That some of these bills may just take time is true, but we've also seen that they will take leadership and courage, that even good laws that we need encounter resistance and headwinds along the way. So all of you want to build more homes. You all have detailed plans to do so. So the question of tonight is what has to happen to convert these good intentions into homes that people can live in?
We need to use finance much more aggressively to drive down the cost of housing. And the third thing I'll say is this. The cities and counties in California do not want to have housing in general. As someone said to me one time, they'd rather have a used car lot than they would a new housing, a new apartment. I've said that I will, on day one, call a special election to close a corporate real estate tax loophole worth over $20 billion to the state of California, so that instead of, when we're talking about a new housing facility in a city or county, it's not an unfunded liability, an unfunded mandate, it's a funded mandate. And we can then work with the cities and counties and they can stop dragging their feet.
I'm going to make sure that those workers who are building those homes can actually think about buying those homes themselves. And all it takes is for us to work together to make sure we are dropping costs. It's far more than just labor. There are a lot of things that are involved here, and we would tackle those.
Construction down here. I'm hearing new bond programs, but the cost of construction is too high. That's what your plan says. What brings it down?
So one, you go after the red tape, so we try to streamline, and again, the legislation that the legislature passed over this last year helps reduce some of the red tape that you have at the state level. We have to tack it at the local level because of the high fees that are imposed. You have to also make sure that they aren't trying to use their ordinances to try to prevent us from being able to build.
Ms. Porter, you've often said on the trail here that time is money, something I hear from developers too. The RAND study I mentioned found that it takes about 27 months to complete a multifamily housing project in Texas, 37 months to complete it in Colorado, and 49 months in California. Why does it take so long here, and what would you do about it?
Study is very, very clear that the speed is the driver. Now, that's not to say there aren't a lot of things that were mentioned that contribute to the speed. But if we could be 22 months faster, which is what Colorado does, which does care about the environment and does have good worker standards, then the estimates are we could take 10 or even 20% off the price, and that was market rate. So yes, we need more housing, but we also need more housing is a tool to less expensive housing. And so I think it's really important to think about all the different tools in your toolkit. I strongly support the pending legislation that would create one uniform statewide permit, making it easier for everyone to have the same permit, easier for the state to monitor those denials. I also think it's a really good idea to limit how many sort of last-second add-ons can come. So I think right now you ought to have to, if you're a city and you get a permit, should have 30 days. That's the proposal in the legislature. You could argue it could be 45 or 60 to say this is what the fees are going to be. This is your contribution for sewer. This is your contribution for school. And then you cannot do what we see now, which is just a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, which is a little bit more delay and then a little bit more cost until pretty soon the project is unaffordable. So those are just a couple of ideas, but we've got a lot of different geographies in California. They're gonna solve this problem different ways, but they all need to do it much faster because time is money.
There's a difficult irony you see, not only in that study, but it comes up again and again in my own housing reporting. There is no form of housing that Democrats feel more strongly about, support more unanimously than affordable housing. Affordable housing costs more to construct per square foot than market rate housing does. When you look at that same study that we are hyping up here on the stage, what you see is that it costs about twice per it costs twice as much to construct a square foot of market rate housing in California as in Texas, 4 times as much to do a square foot of affordable housing as market rate housing in Texas. Now that affordable housing is being built partly on the public dime. Why is it so much more expensive here to do affordable housing than market rate?
Yep.
What do you do about it?
This is not a surprise because look, affordable housing projects face more delays. They face more obstacles. They face more community resistance. They face more restrictions on zoning. People don't necessarily want them in a lot of our communities. And so the other piece of this is that land becomes more expensive every time you have uncertainty about whether something is going to happen. The costs go up. I think we ought to be trying to drive down the cost of construction, but the land is a tricky piece. The state should contribute land for affordable and workforce violations, and that would be my approach.
Thank you, Ms. Porter. Mayor Mahan, San Jose has been able to approve over 20,000 new homes for construction, most of which did not get built because the economics didn't work out. What could Sacramento do to get those 20,000 homes built?
The state can impose upon cities some standards and requirements and caps that can hold us accountable. Now, we didn't wait for that in San Jose. In the last 2 years, we have moved our multifamily housing approvals in our downtown, all of our planned growth areas, along all of our transit corridors, to what's called a ministerial approval. I mean, it's essentially by right. Doesn't go to the planning commission, doesn't come to the city council. It's just a weekly hearing in the planning department, and you get told to go. It actually exempts CEQA. So you're building by right if you conform with what we've zoned, and we've zoned for dense multifamily housing in these areas. We have dramatically reduced the timeline for building. So I am deep in this right now as a mayor of a big city. We just had a 560 unit project get approved in no time. Came in, got the approval, they're ready to go. So that's speed. Now the state can impose those standards and set deadlines and use its ability to basically impose effectively a builder's remedy by right and say, if you don't meet these turnaround times, city or county, the developer is going to, by law, have the right to build a conforming project. We eventually in the long run are better off, but it's a tough trade-off to make because you get yelled at by the park advocates, by the affordable housing advocates, by every other advocate you can imagine. We had a council member literally lose his seat not long ago in San Jose, and our last mayor lose his council majority over a fee reduction because it was framed as a giveaway to developers. The nexus is pretty loose. Nobody's getting $65,000 worth of value out of the neighborhood park. I'm sorry, I love our parks.
I want to talk a bit about one of the difficult fights that a lot of housing projects have run into, which is the conflict with cities and counties. And Mr. Becerra, you were state attorney general when California began suing cities over housing. You sued Huntington Beach. You led the San Mateo case that expanded the Housing Accountability Act's zone of authority. Governor Newsom has now threatened lawsuits against 15 more cities and counties for dragging their feet or opposing state housing law. Do these lawsuits work to build more housing? I mean, Huntington Beach, it's been just years of legal wrangling, not new build. And if they don't, what enforcement tools would you want to use or create as governor to align cities with the state?
Ezra, you have to use every tool you have, and certainly litigation is one. You hate to have to go there. You would hope that you would have cooperation between state and local government. Local governments have, for any number of reasons, decided they want to be able to control what happens when it comes to housing in their jurisdiction. And they do have tools, zoning laws. We talk about these fees that they try to collect to help them with infrastructure. But what I would say is we have to have an agreement, a state, local government agreement, that there has to be a clear path on what the state of California will do when it comes to housing. Every local government must then fall in place to make sure they're doing their fair share. The lawsuit against Huntington Beach was because Huntington Beach had its own housing element plan. It itself had made it clear that they needed to build several hundred units of new housing, and then they reneged. And so when we sued them, we said, it's in your own plan, you're just not willing to do it. The reason we won is because they were violating the law. The case against San Mateo County was simply to make it clear that the state has a role when it comes to housing, because while we all are Californians and we're Angelinos or Oaklanders or whatever else, we all have to be able to live and work and survive in California. So the state of California has a role to play. I defended the law that said that every jurisdiction is accountable to meet its housing responsibility. And we prevailed in court and found that that law was constitutional, which set the foundation for us to now be able to push and see the legislation that has now become law that's going to let us build more.
But has that law given cities, and again, I'll use Huntington Beach as the example, and say, we don't want to do this. The representatives you're dealing with there are elected on a platform of not doing this. Why is it the state's prerogative to tell them what to do?
Well, the same reason kids have to eat their broccoli. I mean, we all have to live by rules. I guarantee you, everyone would love to be able to cross through an intersection and not have to worry about the red light, but we have rules.
I live in New York. Nobody worries about the red light.
Thank God this is California. See, we're not, look, we're a society that believes that we must, and we teach our kids to follow rules. And if you're a city and you see the housing crisis and you're not following the rules, then get ready, because I'm going to enforce. I will use the powers of the state, working with the Attorney General, working with our housing and community development agencies, and working with those who are willing to push the envelope to say, I'm going to give you a reason to do this building. I'm going to give you an incentive. I'll put you in the front of the line. But at some point, you're going to pay the price, because we need to build.
Mayor Mahan, building on that, we do see repeatedly this dynamic where big housing bills pass in Sacramento, then cities and counties find ways to delay or evade them. You're a mayor right now, also running for governor. How would you handle this tension between local control and state goals differently than Governor Newsom has?
Well, I think Governor Newsom has been a champion for housing. And while he and I have disagreed publicly on some other policy areas, I think he's been bolder on housing than other past governors we've had. And I give him a lot of credit for that. I mean, my philosophy is that we should use our housing element process and the RHNA targets to tell cities and counties what is expected of them, the policies, the programs, and the zoning, and the space they need to create for housing and the ability to approve it quickly. I talked about capping fees, and we should give local control up to the point where they lose the privilege of having that local control. I can tell you from experience, we were on the receiving end of this. We had a number of critiques of a housing element that started under my predecessor and then around the time I came into office.
Can you describe what a housing element is?
This is a policy document that we as a city and counties as well have to submit to the state to basically show that we have zoned to create room for new housing and that we have programs and policies at the local level that will in fact enable that housing to get built. And we had some critiques of our plan, and it was a slow back and forth, a slow process for getting it passed. And like many other cities in the state, we did not meet one of the deadlines for approval, and the state has an accountability mechanism that I would suggest is much more effective. It's not fun to be on the receiving end of it, but is much more effective than lawsuits, which is what's called builder's remedy. And I think that a lawsuit should be the last resort here. I feel very strongly that our next governor cannot bring a lawyer's mindset to this problem. It is a market failure. It is a process failure. It's the cost stack. It's the efficiency. It's innovation like modular. But in this case, when cities fail to meet permitting deadlines, when they try to use fees and local building codes to block housing, when they don't deliver on actually enabling housing to get built, I think the state should override and create by right mechanisms for developers to move ahead projects, whether or not the city likes it. I think that's an accountability mechanism that's more effective, frankly, because what we see with these lawsuits is they drag on for years, they get appealed, and eventually maybe the court tells the locality, go back and update your policies, update your general plan, update your housing element or whatever it is. And we're not actually seeing housing get built. Huntington Beach is not building more housing, to your point. San Diego, I think, was sued, when Mr. Becerra was the AG, and one of the projects with 2,000 units still hasn't gotten built. So I think the legal path is not particularly effective if we actually want to build housing.
Over the question of whether or not the litigation is effective, you have 1 minute to expand on that.
And I believe because Matt didn't identify the project specifically, but this was a project in the San Diego County area that was in the hills in wildfire risky areas. It was a pretty large development, several thousand units. It had one route for egress. And we went to the developer and we went to the county and said, this is a safety hazard. This is something that could lead to the loss of life if indeed we have a wildfire. This was when I was AG between 2017 and 2021, way before Palisades and Altadena. And we simply said to them, if you're gonna build that many housing units and people are gonna be living up there and there's a wildfire that hits, you better have a way for these folks to be able to save their lives. Having one route of egress was not gonna do it. So we said to them, if you're not gonna take care of this, guess what? We're going to have to sue you. We tried not to do the litigation, but sometimes, Matt, it does help to have someone who knows how to enforce the law.
Mr. Villaraigosa, you were mayor of Los Angeles, a city very close to my heart as a UCLA graduate, and I grew up an hour south. There you go. LA has not exactly been a model of pro-housing policy of late. Mayor Karen Bass signed ED1, which expedited affordable housing, then started rolling it back because of local opposition when it seemed to work almost too well. LA passed Measure ULA, a transfer tax on the sale of properties over $5 million, which seems to have cut the development of multi-family properties. SB 79, which increases housing density around transit, passed in Sacramento, and LA City Council passed a rezoning to slow it down. What would you do as governor to make Los Angeles an engine of housing progress again?
Look, I'm opposed to the ULA. The ULA is a transfer tax, everybody. What it says, it sounds good, they call it the mansion tax. It says that homes over 5 million, you have to have a 5% transfer tax. You can't buy a mansion in LA, number one, for 5 million, but number two, it doesn't just impact single-family dwellings. It impacts multifamily dwellings. It impacts commercial. Speaking of Rand and UCLA, my alma mater, they did a study, and that study showed that we've had an 84% drop in construction since the ULA. I was doing abundance. In 2012, I went to Obama and I said, reward cities and counties that are putting up their own money, allow us to access low-cost loans to build transit, and then I said, put NEPA and CEQA together to cut time, because you said it, what drives up cost is time, or impact fees, or CEQA. You know, do you know that under CEQA, you don't need it's supposedly the California Environmental Quality Act, you don't need to sue on environmental reasons. NEPA, you do. You can sue from Richmond, Virginia, for a project in Richmond, California. Yes, you can. It's broken. I've been taking it on for 20 years, nationally and lately, that with Buffy and some of these people, I love what they're doing, because this is what we have to do to build.
Let me ask you about the politics of Los Angeles, because I do take the legislators there, the mayors there, as responding to local demands. I remember speaking to Mayor Garcetti at one point, and there was pressure after Los Angeles passed Measure HHH. Well, they got the money to build, but a lot of places didn't want it built where they were. And so there is a push here, even in a city where housing is very expensive. So, you know that city as well as anybody. Like, how would you persuade both the mayor of Los Angeles and the people of it that the things you want to do are good for LA?
You know, there's a lot of agreement here. Javier said something about using a carrot and a stick. I agree. That's what I did. I love using carrots. I loved going into neighborhoods, talking about the need to build a housing or a homeless facility or wherever it is. I love working with them and compromising with them. But in the end, I understood one thing. If you want to be popular, get a dog. Yes.
You've not met my dogs.
These are jobs where you gotta make tough calls. I made those tough calls. That's how crime went down 48%. It was the most violent big city in America when I got there. That's how graduation rates went up 60%. I rocked the apple cart and I made the tough calls, and that's what you have to do when you're governor. We passed all these laws, but we gotta implement them, and I agree with you. Gavin has, without question, been a housing governor. We passed the laws, but now we need the leadership to actually implement them, which is why I've said we need an accountability, a housing production accountability board within the housing department to make sure they're meeting not just their housing element, but actually building the housing that they say that's in that element.
Thank you, Mr. Villaraigosa.